Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy, Kevin Forte. Today, we are going to continue in the Western Conference, specifically in the Central Division, as we continue our season preview videos. We'll be doing these videos up until the end of the second week of September, so stay tuned. 2 videos a day. We're going to be banging these out before the preseason. As the preseason starts, we want to be ready for camp and, of course, puck drop in October, which I'm so excited for. We are less than a month away from the regular season beginning in the National Hockey League. Very, very exciting. So today we're looking at the Minnesota Wild, and for the Wild it's been a rough couple years. The Central Division's been a weird division where sometimes they make the playoffs, but they get bounced in the first round, or they completely miss the playoffs. So for the Minnesota Wild, I kind of feel the same way this year, and you look at their lineup, it's a pretty solid forward group. You've got Kirill Kaprizov, Marco Rossi, and Zuccarello as your top line. That's definitely interesting now that we see Rossi kind of taking over up front. Marcus Johansson, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matthew Boldy as your second line. A lot of balance in that top 6. I really like that. And here's where things get interesting. So you've got the bottom 6. You've got Marcus Foligno, Jacob Lauko, Ryan Hartman, Yakov Trenin, Freddie Gaudreau, and Marat Kuznatinov. And I think the X factor this year, because you know what you're getting from Kaprizov and Rossi and Boldy. You know what you're getting from those guys. Those guys proved a lot last season. What are we going to see from a guy coming in, like maybe a depth addition like Jacob Lauko, or specifically Marat Kuznatinov? This is a guy that the Minnesota Wild are very high on. They think he could potentially be that next guy to come in and add that scoring depth to this roster. Now, does that mean he's going to take over Eriksson Ek or Rossi as the second or first line center? Probably not. But he's going to be a good player to add to this team, and they desperately need more goal scoring. He comes in at the perfect time for the Minnesota Wild. So keep an eye out for Marat Kuznatinov. Looking at the defense, kind of an interesting story. The theme for this defense is size. This is a big defense, but the question is, do they have enough mobility and skating and the ability to kind of be a threat offensively as well? That's one of the concerns. So the defense, you got Brodin and Faber as your top pair. We're going to see Brock Faber turn it up this year. When Minnesota fans, anytime I talk about the Minnesota Wild, or even in my video talking about the top defensemen, everybody was talking about Brock Faber. So Brock Faber is going to be one that a lot of people are going to be very high on. So keep an eye out for him. I think this is going to be another good season for him. Playing alongside Brodin, that's a solid top pair. Jacob Middleton and Jared Spurgeon. We know the issues with Spurgeon recently. Middleton is a good defenseman when he's out there, and then other moments he gets turned around and looks like a little bit silly. So we'll see what happens there. I think it's a weak second pair, but it's okay. Third pair, you've got Declan Chisholm and Zach Bogosian. He's still hanging around. Again, you want to talk about size on this blue line? There you go. This is a pretty big, beefy blue line, but are they mobile? And are they going to get caught in odd man rushes the other way and things like that? That's where I think it's going to be much more of a kind of a defensive, like keep everything in front of you. Specifically for this Minnesota Wild defense. The scoring isn't going to be too much of an issue, I don't think. You've got Rossi, Boldy, Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek. You have guys that can score on this team. I'm not terribly worried about that. It is the defense, and this is the team that used to be known for their really good defensemen. Back in the day when Dumbo was on his game, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Ryan Suter, that was a top 4 defense that was solid. Now, as things have progressed a little bit, the mentality for this defense, I don't know where I feel it is right now. That third pair of Chisholm and Bogosian, is that a third pair defense on a regular basis for a playoff team in the National Hockey League? I don't really think so. And I just made a video talking about the Los Angeles Kings in the Pacific Division. I think the Minnesota Wild are a really similar team in the Central Division for a lot of the same reasons, unfortunately, if you watch that video, because I think that they have some really good pieces here up front. The defense has me concerned because, again, if there's one defensive injury, if Jared Spurgeon isn't ready to go this season, what are we talking about here? Is this team going to be able to sustain without one of those defensemen? Either it's Faber, Brodin, or Spurgeon over a full 82-game schedule. If they lose those guys for 20, 30 games, it's going to be a long season for the Minnesota Wild. Goaltending, I'm optimistic, but based off last year, I have some hesitancy. Philip Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury had moments of greatness, but then Fleury still had a sub 900 save percentage. And Philip Gustafsson, when they really needed him down the stretch, there were games that you were kind of wanting more. And I think for the Minnesota Wild, like I said, they're not bad enough where they should be rebuilding, or they're one of the bottom teams in that division, like maybe say like in the Central, right? So like maybe Utah or Chicago or even St. Louis. I think that the Minnesota Wild are much better than those teams, but are they good enough to sneak into a wild card spot or make the playoffs? And the way I have it right now, the Minnesota Wild, I have them missing the playoffs. And I think it comes down to, I think we're going to see, I do. Actually, I do. Hold on. I don't know what happened here. But I do, indeed, have the Minnesota Wild making the playoffs. I changed my prediction here. So the Minnesota Wild, I think because the Western Conference is going to be a little bit weaker, and this is going to be the annual conversation where, based off my predictions, just to give you an example. So the Islanders have 99 points in my predictions. Detroit and Ottawa have 98, and Buffalo has 96. So there's 4 teams that either have the same amount of points or have more points than the Minnesota Wild, who I predict will have 96, and they miss the playoffs in the East. Minnesota and LA make the playoffs with 93 and 96 points. I know that sounds crazy, but I think there's going to be a lot more parity in this division. The teams that were at the bottom, the suckers at the bottom, like Arizona, Chicago, San Jose, I don't think they're going to be they're still going to be toward the bottom, but they're going to close the gap a lot from where they were last year. And I think the only real team that's going to see a significant downgrade from last year, potentially in the West, is a team like Calgary. Other than that, I think pretty much everybody else in the West is going to be playing better than they did last year. I think Anaheim's better than they were last year. I think Seattle's better than they were last year, especially adding Stevenson and Montour. So now I'm starting to go on a tangent talking about the Western Conference as a whole, but I think that's an important thing to keep in mind with the Wild is, like I said, they're really close here. Technically, I have them making the playoffs, but it is by a thin margin, by the skin of their teeth. But for Minnesota Wild fans, that's what they're used to, because that's what this team typically does, is they just do enough to make the playoffs and get bounced in the first round of the playoffs, sometimes in embarrassing fashion. And I don't think that's what Minnesota Wild fans want to hear. At that point, I think they'd rather hear that they're going to be tanking for one of the top picks in next year's draft, rather than this continued misery of just getting in and just making the playoffs just to get walloped in the first round. Now, there's a lot to be said. You ask teams in the East right now that are like, yeah, we haven't made the playoffs in a decade. Yeah, we haven't made the playoffs in 2 decades. They would love to just get their ticket to the playoffs. So for Minnesota Wild fans, count your blessings while you can, but I think the Wild have enough to get to the playoffs. How they do in those said playoffs and the matchup probably isn't going to be favorable, especially if it's a team like Colorado or Dallas or even Nashville for that matter. Minnesota's going to have a rough go ahead. And I look at this defense, I really think that's the key thing here. We've always talked about how they need a top 6 center and this and that. They might have fixed that center group. I really like what they have there with Rossi, Ek, and Kuznatinov. So now it comes down to, all right, let's add up that defense a little bit back to where we were in the mid-2010s. Can we get a solid top 4 that we're like, yeah, we can win with this? And if they can do that, if they can add another defenseman there, I truly believe the Minnesota Wild are going to be a threat. They're 1 or 2 pieces away from really being a legit Stanley Cup contender. But I want to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of the Minnesota Wild? Are they a playoff team or not? Let me know. Guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.